Welcome to the Deer Wizard Podcast, conversation shaping the deer industry. I'm your host, Josh Newton, the Deer Wizard. Through interviews, advocacy, and industry news, we deliver field-proven insights to help producers build better herds.
So I got a question for everybody right out of the gate. Have you ever sedated an animal before? So for many of you that are watching, you're a deer farmer, rancher, you have elk, you have exotic species. Have you ever had to immobilize an animal? I bet the answer is yes. And we have a really interesting guest today. We have Cullen from Capture Lab RX. They're based out of Laramie, Wyoming. And Cullen has a really interesting story about how Capture Labs came to be. We get into some detailed conversations relating to compounding, their pharmacy, some of their backstory, the research they're doing. I have quite a bit of experience in remote delivery, specifically in the immobilization world. And so I add some stories in there that I've experienced out in the field, and we get Colin's take as a pharmacist on the why and the how that these things are happening. It gives you a much better understanding of some of these compounds that that we're working with, and it makes you ultimately a better producer and propagator of the animals that we really enjoy. We talk a bit about his story and his partner Dan's story about the birth of Capture Labs and their backgrounds. And these guys are great guys. They're hunters. They were hunters long before they got into any of this space, and so they have a direct passion for the health and well-being of these animals that I think you and I all share together. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Cullen, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Thanks for having us on. It's been a pleasure.
I see a bull elk shoulder above there. I kind of wish I could see those antlers. I also see a cool bongo picture. I'm assuming you're in your office. Where is your office?
Yeah, so we are located in Laramie, Wyoming, right at the kind of the edge of the Rocky Mountains, and this is where I grew up. The other owner to the pharmacy, he grew up right at the edge of the mountains too. So to say that we are alcoholics and love hunting and being in the mountains is kind of an understatement. So I can move my camera and show you. He is our office manager.
Oh, I love it.
He sits right above right above my desk and right above Dan's desk, and kind of keeps us in line throughout the day.
Sweet. All the folks listening on the podcast are gonna be a little jealous. They just didn't see that elk. I'm a little jealous because we have elk in Pennsylvania, but it's a lottery draw, and it's hard to get an elk tag. We don't have the herds that Wyoming has. I think our population last check was 1680 or something like that. So it's not, we don't have a ton. There's 6 or 8 counties in kind of west central northern part of Pennsylvania. But interesting project because they back in I think it was I want to say 1929, they imported a bunch of the genetics here in PA from Yellowstone. Mm-hmm. And so the predominant genetic strain is out of the park there. And I want to say they killed 7 bulls over 400 last year in PA. So we got some big elk. We just don't have the numbers, So yeah, it's cool. I don't want to tangent off into elk hunting stories because we'll end up chatting for a couple hours about that, and not chat about Capture Labs. So give us a little rundown of what Capture Labs is, and kind of maybe your backstory and Dan's backstory a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am one of the pharmacists and part owner of a pharmacy called Capture Lab RX. The other owner and pharmacist, his name is Dan Hagerman. He and we have worked together for a really long time. So Capture Lab, yes, it's relatively a new pharmacy. However, Dan and I have been doing this. I've been doing it since before I even graduated pharmacy school. Dan was shortly thereafter. We have been compounding medications in this industry for over a decade. we kind of cut our teeth at a pretty well-known pharmacy years ago called Zopharm, or
Mm.
Wildlife Pharmaceuticals. I got an internship there even prior to graduation. And I knew within the first day that this is what I want to do. I came home and I told my wife, I said, I just found my dream job. This is what I want to do for the rest of my career. That's where I met Dan. So pretty quickly in that process, once I graduated, became a pharmacist, I kind of found my role as the lead compounding pharmacist there. And so if you purchase drug from Zopharm between 2014 and kind of summer of 2023, pretty good chance I compounded it. And then Dan was the pharmacy manager, also known as the pharmacist in charge. So there, he literally oversees every detail of that pharmacy. And a big part of that is the regulatory side of things. When an inspector walks in the door, he's kind of the man in the spotlight. His license is on the line for things. He's also licensed in about every state you can imagine. So that's kind of how we grew and developed in this industry, and really pretty fortunate in all honesty, in hindsight. Granted, we're probably both a little biased, but I would say Zopharm was kind of at the pinnacle as a pharmacy in our industry and in the wildlife community. So what a great place to learn. What a great group of people to learn from. It was an amazing experience and really has kind of led us to where we are today. And just super grateful to now be doing our own thing and kind of bring a new breath to our industry, kind of some new ideas, and want to kind of take off from where we kind of stopped there at Zopharm.
Yeah, that's awesome. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Lance and having dinner with him quite a few times. I suspect that you spent quite a bit of time with him, and he was a really unique individual in the pharmacology space, right? And could you just I believe he like cut his teeth over in South Africa back in the I think a lot in the 60s. And like he really was, I think, the impetus of for us here in the States, and at least in the whitetail space, a new class of drug that we were able to use. Give us a little bit of a story about maybe, meeting Dr. Lance, and because like he was a cool dude. Like uh I enjoy listening to his stories. I suspect you might have one for us.
Yeah, so I'll tell you the thing that I remember most about Dr. Lance, because he would walk into that pharmacy, he's not like big in stature or anything like that, but when he would walk in with a smile on his face, he could change a room, he could change an entire atmosphere, and so I will always remember that. And then I actually read his book. He has a book that he wrote kind of about his history, and just a very well-rounded, interesting man. I mean, he was a helicopter pilot. He did all kinds of things, right? Ultimately becoming a veterinarian. And the story that I remember most, and it's actually in his book, he was doing some work with moose, right? It was a very high-profile project here in Colorado, or down in Colorado, I should say. And I think one of them ended up dying. They had done everything perfect. They'd done it by the book. The drugs that they had at that point just had limitations, and the safety profile just wasn't the greatest. And he kind of has always kind of discussed that was the turning point where he looked at himself and he said, there has got to be a better, more effective way to do this as far as immobilization of wildlife species. And that is what sparked everything else that he kind of worked at. And because of his personality, and I think that, his intelligence and all of that, he got the right group of people around him, and they started working on different drug combinations. He was able to bring ultra potent opioids like carfentanil, atorphine, thiofentanil, introduce them into the United States, develop protocols, work with some of the best in this industry to really reshape how we immobilize wildlife. I mean, he really, again, I'm biased, right? But I would say that a lot of the work that he did revolutionized how we look at immobilizing wildlife, whether that's free-ranging wildlife, captive wildlife, the zoo community, all of it. He has touched it all in one way or another.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I came up in the area of using xylazine, right? Like we had 100 mg per mil xylazine. Like that's what we had to, sedate deer. And it was not safe, right? Like generally speaking, did it work? Sure. But like, I call it a rodeo. Like it was a challenge, right? And I distinctly remember, using my first BAM kit, and I was just like, "You probably made it," and I was just like, "This is a game changer," right? Um, so I want to get into that because like I know we've advanced even past that, and I know you guys are just doing some cool work there at Capture Labs. So I wanna cover that. Before we do that, obviously taking on the task of building a new pharmacy is a huge undertaking, right? And so you've obviously you and Dan have shown a huge level of commitment just getting that going.
Yeah.
Give us give us a little background on what that's like, right? Because like we're talking like highly like the most regulated thing that you could possibly do, probably one of the hardest things you could do, due to the regulations and safety concerns. um you chose to do it. What was that moment that you were like, we got to do this?
Yeah. I think it was a culmination of a couple things for me, Dan, as well. One of them was I had finally finished Dr. Lance's book, right? A legacy and a drive and a motivation to evolve and grow in an industry. That tradition, that sense of this is where we want to go, was something that we wanted to continue. We wanted to build upon that. So I had kind of finished reading his book. It also, when Zopharm was purchased by a different company, that brick and mortar store was closed. So I'd spent my whole career compounding these very unique medications, very unique products, very unique niche part of this industry. And you can't just go down the road to the next Walmart and find another job doing the same thing.
Yeah.
In fact, there was at one point I thought, well, I grew up welding. Maybe I go back to being a welder. I know I can make a living at that. Yeah. My wife kind of kicked me. She goes, "Are you serious? You've spent 10 plus years developing these skills that you can't learn in a school, that very few people on the pharmacy side of things know and understand. You should really try to give this a try." And I think Dan had very similar path to saying, okay, let's do this. We can. We think we can. We know we can. Let's just do it. And I'll tell you, I'm a pretty faith-based person. I let that kind of guide a lot of what I do. What a challenge, right? What a leap of faith. You go from, supporting your family from a financial standpoint, all those things, and now you're not going to take a paycheck for potentially a year or more. That's a huge leap of faith. And so I think the biggest part of that, maybe a benefit, an underlying benefit, is it's full commitment. Like, you have no option other than success, and you are going to give it 110% to make sure you see that. And so Dan and I both have basically taken that by the horn, and that's how we're approaching this. So when you think about all of the different nuances and challenges, I think first committing to it, like you said, having a good, strong faith in that we're doing the right thing, and really putting that at the forefront, and then everything else you do just kind of falls into place from there. But you hit the nail on the head. This is an absolute challenge. Pharmacy in general is one of the most regulated industries in the United States. And then you take classic pharmacy and you make it a specialty pharmacy. So now you're a sterile compounding pharmacy, and you have a whole other book of regulations that go along with that. And every time they revamp that book, it gets tighter and tighter and tighter. And so that is the beauty of Dan. So Dan is he would never say this. He's way too humble. He is a regulatory genius. And I think that's the great thing about our dynamic, is that he has that, and he has the ability to kind of, I'll dream up all these ideas, and he kind of keeps me grounded and saying, okay, let's not chase every rabbit. Let's systematically chase them so that we can actually catch a few. And this is how we're going to do it from a regulatory standpoint, and make sure that we can. The other benefit is this is not reinventing the wheel. I mean, Dan, as the pharmacist in charge, ran a very successful pharmacy for many, many years and navigated all that to a T. So we really kind of were able to take all of the wonderful things that we had learned, and things that maybe didn't go so well, things that maybe went great, and said, okay, if we're going to start from scratch today, how would we do that? And hence now we have Capture Lab.
That's awesome. I'm curious because, again, from an outsider's perspective, the pharmacy is based around um, wildlife, wild animals, captive animals, but wild as in deer, elk, etc. Um, do you think there's a tie or a bond that you both have because you're hunters, that helps excel and drive that passion forward for the relationships that we as producers have and yourself with the animals?
Yeah, I think, I've been asked similar questions to that in the past, and I think there is an absolute truth to that. So I grew up in the mountains in Colorado. We rode horses into the backcountry, and those are some of my first memories as a kid. Following my dad, and there's elk on the side of the trail, or a bear runs across the meadow. I mean, it's immersed, and it's a part of what you do from the time you're a little kid. So yes, I think the fact that we have kind of that relationship with the wildlife and hunting. And, I'll tell you, I love hunting. In school, it was an addiction, right? I probably would have done a lot better in school if it wasn't for hunting. But the thing is, you learn an appreciation for it. It's not just about harvesting an animal. There is so much more to hunting when it comes to conservation and having respect and care for the animals, that you can translate that into everything we do here at the pharmacy. Because in all honesty, Josh, this pharmacy exists because of people like you, because of the ranching and wildlife community, the state agencies that are working with free ranging animals. We are here because of you. And so we have to, that can never be lost on us. We have to appreciate that fact. And everything we do has to be related to it. And so if we also have the same love and appreciation for the wildlife and the animals that you take care of, that you grow, and that you put your heart and soul into, that allows us to kind of have that same effect or that same passion into the products that we provide for your animals. So your success directly relates to our success, and your passion has to also align with our passion, these animals. So
I love the longer that I'm in this industry, the more I find it compelling when companies kind of come along and their core mission aligns with the animals themselves as opposed to the dollars that are generated, right? Like I'm not anti-profit. Like I like making money just like everybody else, and I got a family to feed, and that's important, right? But you have like more of a compassionate take towards the industry that you serve, and all this stuff comes back to hunting and the care for these animals. And like I suspect for people that either don't hunt or are anti eating meat or whatever that is, they just don't understand that relationship, because they think that the harvesting of an animal or the killing of an animal is just bad on its face, right? And it's so interesting when I see these companies kind of pop up and or participate for long periods of time in the industry. You can kind of weed some people out pretty quick. And when we first met, I didn't sense that at all, right? Like you guys, you and Dan are like, like 3 minutes into the conversation, you're like, yo, check out this elk, right? And I'm just like,
okay.
guys are great. So I appreciate what you're doing. I want to get into the compounding side of things, because this is the behind the scenes action where all the magic happens. And so, like for me as an end user, like I've used the cap kits, and we're gonna get into that. And like I just know they work, right? I have no
Yeah.
idea how they work. I don't know how they're built. Walk us through what the heck a compounding pharmacy is, what you guys do on a day to day, and like how these products are developed for use.
Yeah, that's a great question. So in all reality, the bones of any pharmacy is going to be pretty similar. Whether you're a Walmart retail pharmacy, whether you're a specialty compounding pharmacy like us, the regulatory side of things requires it that way as a foundation, right? But then you get into the specialty side of things. We're a sterile compounding pharmacy. We further specialize in chemical immobilization drugs for wildlife, amongst a few other drugs, but that's really our kind of heart and soul. So the breathing part, the heartbeat of our pharmacy is our sterile compounding suite. And I can actually turn the camera around
Yeah,
and show you.
yeah, let's check it out for sure.
So we have an open concept to our pharmacy. The idea is, from my desk right here, I can look into every room of the sterile compounding suite. I can monitor a technician if they're in their compounding. I can see them putting orders together on the counter in front of me. That was all by design. So I guess I could turn the camera around and show you what the pharmacy looks like. So,
it's right there.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
So for those listening, Cullen just turned his camera around from his desk, and like literally the secure part of the facility is like open glass. It's all, I'm assuming that's all sealed and everything, but like that's just wild. It's right there.
Yeah. So
there's no messing around. There's no messing around in the lab.
No. Yeah. We can see everything that goes on. You scratch your head wrong, and the pharmacist can see it. So, again, all by design. It's a plexiglass system. It is fully sealed, like you said. We have to keep pressure gradients between each room. So, if you think about it in a most simple way, we have 3 rooms. The first room is where you gown, garb, wash your hands, and then you progressively get cleaner, so to speak, as you go deeper into the room until you get to the final 3rd room, where our hood is located, and then that's where the final step of the process happens. That's where things get sterilized and bottled into their final unit. So the middle room, we call it our middle room, that's where we're taking just raw powder, raw ingredients, and we mix it with our proprietary compounding processes, and we end up with a solution. And to me, that's kind of one of the specialties of our pharmacy, is that we're able to take drugs that, if you Googled atipamezole, right, and you looked up the solubility of atipamezole, meaning how much powder can I dissolve into water, you might get 30, 35 milligrams per mil at most, right? Maybe even 20. We can get it all the way to 60 mg per mil. So that's kind of the science and the fun part of the lab, so to speak, is we're taking these drugs that should not go into solution at those concentrations, and we're getting them to go into solution. And on top of that, we're making them very stable. So that was a big part of what we wanted to do, was make something highly concentrated so you have lower volumes, right? And then, can we make it freezer compatible? Can you put this thing in the freezer and have it not fall apart as a compound? And so far, we've been really successful with that. So the idea is, you're taking a product from just raw powdered ingredients, you're putting it into a solution, you're dissolving the powders, you're mixing them at the appropriate ratios, and then the final step is the sterilization. And then when it comes out in its little individual vials, and then that's where the general process of the pharmacy starts, with the labeling and then filling prescriptions and all of those things. So the idea is, we're just taking it, and it sounds as simple as just following it like a recipe, but it is not. You can try it the same way every time, and if you're not able to make adjustments on the fly with pH, temperatures, and types of things, that really is kind of what makes this a specialty, is that you have to have that kind of intuition to make these compounds perfect every time.
How many batches have you messed up?
Hey, knock on wood. So so I will tell you, every batch we make, it gets sent off to a third-party lab that tests potency, sterility. They test for presence of endotoxin, all those things, right? In the course since 2014, we have never had to recall a batch ever. One time, and this wasn't ours, they had labeled the powder of a particular powder. It wasn't the powder that was labeled in the container. So that's, again, part of why we do all that extra testing. It came back at like 20% potency. They said, there's no way. Like, I weigh this stuff out to the 100th of a gram. I mean, this is, if I'm weighing out 150 grams of powder, I get it to the 100th decimal point of perfect. I know this is better than 20%. So we we speciated it to see what actual product was in it. And of course, it was a completely different product. So other than that one instance, we have never had a failure of a compound.
Yeah, that's awesome. How do you go about, like, I'm sure, like you've mentioned the antipamezole. How do you go from the Google search, if you will, at 20 megs per mil suspension to 60? Obviously, without sharing your proprietary information, like that was kind of my tongue-in-cheek comment to you. Like, how do you do that? Like you gotta try some things. Like, are you mad scientist in the lab, or what does that look like?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, in all honesty, we will take raw powder. So ivermectin, I'll use ivermectin.
Okay.
We got approached to try to make a super concentrated ivermectin. Ivermectin, if you do that same Google search, has 0 water solubility, meaning it does not go into solution at all in water. You have to use some sort of oil-based solvent to get it to go into solution. Well, the problem with that is most oil-based solvents are fairly viscous. They're thick, right? Yep. And they're hard to administer. You definitely can't administer through a dart consistently, at least. And so we were approached by a vet and said, can you do this? So we ordered some ivermectin, and we went into the lab and we tried a handful of different solvents, different compounding processes. So you do fail in that aspect, right? Yep. Until you kind of get your final compound solidified, there are a ton of failures, right? There's times where so order of addition is also very important in the compounding process. Like at what point you add each ingredient, okay? So there's been times where we've made it all the way to the final step, and you do that final step and everything falls out of solution and you got to start all over again. And it can, you remember like Apollo, was Apollo 13, right?
Yeah. The movie. Yeah.
And he's sitting in there trying all those little, processes so that they don't go over a certain amperage, right? Yep. And he fails and then he finally does it in the right order and it works. That's kind of a similar idea to here. We're mixing different solvents, we're doing different orders of operation or addition, and altering pH, altering temperature until we finally hit that home run of this is the compounding process that's going to work for this product.
That's super cool. Okay, let's. I think we're at a good place. I want to jump right into. I'll call it your core product. Maybe it's not, but it's core product for me, and that's the cap kit. Talk about the idea and the development of the cap kit itself, because it's a new product for a lot of people, but similar components or same components, but the concentrations are reworked. I think for the betterment of the animal and the user. Give us a rundown of that.
Yep. So our cap kits, it's a capture kit. We call them cap kits for short. So when you get one, it's going to have a knockdown vial and then the 2 reversal agents. And we have some variations there. But the cap itself is a highly concentrated combination of butorphanol, azaparone, and medetomidine, 3 drugs that are used in a whole variety of other chemical immobilization products. We just make them very, very concentrated. And the idea with that is a couple things. One, we can get smaller volumes, so smaller dart sizes. Flight trajectory, is a little more efficient when it's the difference between shooting a 250 grain bullet and a 100 grain bullet, right? It's the trajectory is flatter, smoother. The idea is that we have less wound, damage from the impact of the dart. Now we're trying to do some studies to see if what the actual implications of that are, but in theory, we should be able to have success there. The other idea is you've got basically the same amount of drug, but in half the volume. And so absorption rates we're finding are much more efficient, much more effective. We're seeing time to first effect within 2 to 3 minutes. So these animals from a whole variety of species, they're already starting to kind of hang their head, slow down, separate from the herd, sometimes within 2 or 3 minutes. And then we're getting time to recumbencies, again, depending on the dose, depending on all the other variabilities. We did a whole group of, I think, 45 white-tailed deer. All of them had an average induction time or time to recumbency of 5.5 minutes. So there are a lot of innate benefits to those higher concentrations. The other thing we tried to do was really streamline the whole compound itself. We wanted to make it more robust. We wanted to have a compound that could withstand frozen temperatures. We wanted to have a compound that was also, you could mix it with a variety of things, right? So we have a compounding process that also pairs with a lot of our individual drugs that we compound. Zoos sometimes will start with a cap type platform, or veterinarians, but then they want to add their own extra drugs on top of that. So you have to be careful when you're starting to mix different products, because again, we talked about order of addition, pH, all of those things can really affect a compound as far as coming out of solution. We wanted to make something that was really robust. So we kind of took all that and said, all right, how do we do that? What's our foundational product? Let's make it. And that's how we came up with our cap kits. We also had to kind of redo that with our reversal agents, so our atipamezole and our naltrexone. Atipamezole, we don't want people to have to be giving large volumes of atipamezole for reversal, right? So we made that atipamezole equally concentrated so that for every 1 ml of the cap you give 2 mL of the atipamezole. It's a very simple, easy reversal ratio, and it's not an excess in volume. And then one of the other things we did, which is really starting to catch on, is we combined naltrexone and atipamezole into one reversal bottle. Now, there's a lot of people that like to customize their own reversals. They want them separate. They want the atipamezole separate from the naltrexone. There's a lot of end users that say, I want simplicity. I want one. If I can have all the reversal in one bottle in one syringe, that's what I want. Historically, because again, I'll pick on atipamezole, it comes out of solution really easy. So historically, if you mix anything with atipamezole, you're flirting with it coming out of solution. But we developed a compounding process that we can take naltrexone, combine it with atipamezole, and we have the appropriate reversal ratios built into those concentrations, and it's all in one. So you can either get a cap kit with the cap and then the atipamezole and the naltrexone, or you can get it with an all-in-one reversal, and it makes it more streamlined. So that's kind of the cap kit in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's interesting because like I find there's like two types of users, right? You have your simplistic users where they just want it easy because they don't want to have to think about it. They want to know the ratios right off the top of their head. They're maybe working with dangerous game, right? And it has to be simple, fast, efficient, right? Safe. And then you have other folks that are maybe dealing with like really odd species and they need custom ability to regulate all sorts of different products as they're reacting to how the sedation's actually going for that species. And so to have that playbook and variety is really great. Now for reference, most of our users are, they're deer and elk guys. But with these, with the the base of the cap kit being the butorphanol, azaparone, medetomidine, you have this really broad spectrum coverage across a whole bunch of different species. Was that? I'm assuming that was a design process that you guys really embraced because of the flexibility. What does that look like kind of moving forward into the future? Because I suspect that, just given our conversation, how your brain works, probably always in this futuristic mode. How can we do things better? What are some new things that we have coming on?
Yeah, you're correct. So we call our cap as kind of our foundational product, right? One of the things we've seen, especially as the exotic industry is growing, the number of species and the variety of species that we're seeing, a cap or a medetomidine, butorphanol, azaparone base product. I for years kind of called it the F-150 of immobilization drugs. It does a lot of things great.
The Chevy and Dodge guys are raging right now.
Yeah. And so in all reality, it does a lot of things great, right? But as and Cervids, so Cervids in general, when Dr. Lance developed some of these combinations and these protocols, those were at the forefront of what he was developing these products for. So what we've seen with the, all of the stuff that's going on in South Africa and having all the species that we have, just like you talked about, there's people that they like to tinker, they like to customize, they like to work at things. And so they found that, well, for Gemsbok, we like to add an additional 2 or 3 drugs, or for Black Buck, we avoid this particular product. There's a whole variety of nuances there. Well, we want, instead of you having to mix drug A and B together in the field, and what kind of level of consistency are you able to achieve, all of those types of things, can we do that here at the pharmacy in a controlled environment with testing and all of that, so that you get a finished product that's already pre-mixed exactly how you need it for that particular species? So now in comes a couple other products. We have our Cap K. So that's basically, we take our cap and we add 100 milligrams per mil of ketamine into it. And for certain species, like Ed mentioned, Gemsbok, Black Buck, Addicts, or even Cervid species for certain procedures, right? When we add that ketamine, I guess to kind of take a step back, we use terms like sedation, anesthesia, tranquilization, right? Those are all, even though we kind of use them interchangeably, may mean very, very different things, right? A butorphanol, azaparone, medetomidine type combo of a drug really is a deep, deep sedation, right? There are some that would argue, can we get a deep enough sedation that we're actually in a plane of anesthesia? Maybe, but none of those drugs are considered true anesthetics. So when we add ketamine on top of that, that's literally what it is. It's a dissociative anesthetic. So we're getting a true plane of anesthesia when we add ketamine. We're getting him into a deeper state of immobilization so that you get less response to stimuli. And so a species like Gemsbok that is notoriously difficult to immobilize with a standard cap, when you add that ketamine on there, the fight is pretty much over. If you get your dosing right, there's no spontaneous arousal. There's no kicking at you. There's no trying to horn you when you are manipulating them or moving them. And we found that has worked well for all. Like, it started with a handful of species in mind, and it's like, wow, this works really great in all these other scenarios. What else can we do? So in addition to that, we have taken cap, added ketamine, and then added midazolam to it. So now, if you look at a product like Tilazol under certain circumstances works really great. It just doesn't reverse very well, right? Or it takes a really long time. There's a story that I've heard from a fish and game officer that they use for grizzly bears. They use Tilazol because they want them, mess around, right? Mm-hmm. But they'll also have to sometimes sit there and watch the culvert trap for 2 or 3 hours before the grizzly bear wakes up and moves off. Well, that's not always practical for the deer farming world and in the captive setting. We can't necessarily take 2 or 3 hours per deer when we're handling it. So if you look at the teletamine in the Tilazol, that's in the same drug class as ketamine. If you look at the zolazepam in Tilazol, that's the same drug class as midazolam. The differences are ketamine and midazolam are a little more short acting, right? They still do the same process, they're just shorter acting. So we have kind of taken some of what we think are the best of all of the different aspects and the products that people use and see, can we meld that into one? Yeah, we're not 100% perfect in every aspect, but we're trying to avoid the long recoveries, the long sedations, but we're getting good immobilization, right? And so that's where the CAP KM with ketamine and midazolam comes into play. There's species like Enyala that are incredibly difficult to immobilize. And we've got a pretty small sample size because we're just starting with the field testing of the CAP KM, but that's working really well in some of those species. And so then you think about, well, I want to do a really long procedure, or I'm doing something that has a lot of pain stimuli. Being able to have kind of extra tools in that tool shed helps you hone the product, hone the dose, and get exactly what you need for that scenario and for that species. And those are just the first 3 that we've started with, right? The idea is we've got a drawing board around the corner that nobody can see because it's hidden behind the corner that has half a dozen ideas on it, 2 or 3. If we can bring those to fruition, huge implications for our industry, right? But we have to have some sort of basis. We got to kind of get our feet underneath us before we can start exploring some of those kind of more experimental type of things. But yeah, we're excited about all of that, and the idea to tailor the products is the idea for
it. Yeah, that's a lot to take in. I'm curious, and I think for the listeners, just for a baseline to work from. So, if I heard you correctly, like for surgeries, now I'm inserting myself a little bit. If you're doing surgeries, let's just say like a lap AI, right? Like an invasive type surgery. It would be warranted to have the added ketamine on board for that dissociative state, to be on a proper anesthetic plane. Is that accurate? Right?
Yeah, that's a very great assumption or assessment. So yeah. I've actually spoken to a gentleman that does a lot of AI, and what he will tell me, and again, I'm sure everybody kind of has their own perspective. What he will say is if he's using a product that's just kind of got the base of sedation, right? So butorphanol, azaparone, medetomidine type product. Mm-hmm. When he starts to enter the ovaries, right, they'll get a little twitch or a little jerk, right? Because I'm sure that's probably painful or whatever that may be, causes a stimulant, right? If he has a protocol that adds ketamine to that, all of a sudden there's no more movement, right? So his ability to enter into the ovaries, do all of that kind of procedural thing is much smoother with the addition of ketamine. And that's because, again, we're reaching that true plane of anesthesia. It has additional pain relief aspects to it. There's a whole variety of benefits. The caveat to ketamine is that ketamine, in all honesty, would be a wonderful product. Its Achilles tendon is that there's no reversal. You can't give a reversal agent for it. It's just time and the animal's metabolism of that drug. So if you have a protocol that is too heavy on the ketamine side and relies on that too much for the immobilization and the anesthesia, well, now you've either got a really prolonged recovery. There's a lot of other side effects like seizure activity, those types of things. It's a dissociative anesthetic, right? So I've always learned in school there's kind of three planes to ketamine. A smaller dose of it, it's causes some sedation, lethargy, that type of thing. There's this middle phase where they're awake-ish, but they are disoriented, they're dissociated, with their surroundings.
Mm-hmm.
They get ataxia, which is a fancy way to say they stumble over themselves, they have no balance. And that's where you kind of get those rodeo situations that are associated with ketamine. And then if you go deeper to that, well, now we get the true plane of anesthesia that we're looking for. So the goal is that the animal is not waking up, walking around in the pasture in that middle phase. Because if they are, you really run the risk of them slamming into the fence or, having all of those negative associations with it. So relying on ketamine just enough to remove some of the things we don't want out of the procedure, some of the benefits of ketamine, but not so heavily relying on it that then we get all the downsides to it for the reversal. That's the idea with kind of like our CAP-K.
Yeah.
And one of the things we've noticed is you're still getting really good immobilizations. You're getting quality sedation and anesthesia. They're solid. They're still. And then when you go to reverse them, if it's been anything over 15, 20 minutes, enough of that ketamine has metabolized that they're mostly out of that middle phase and we get really good reversals. Now, I have yet to have anybody use it on laparoscopic AI, so I can't speak specifically to that. But your head is absolutely on the right track in that there are certain scenarios where you want specific drugs. And so we've got a lot of ideas and a lot of research that we would like to do tailored towards not just specific species, but specific procedures. Like, can we come up with an AI specific combination that gives you, to the best of our ability, kind of the brighter side of all aspects of the drugs that are being used? We don't rely too heavy on anything so that you get the best of what you want.
Yeah, I like that a bunch. I know that, I don't know how many sedations I have under my belt, but it's thousands and thousands. And I've experienced all sorts of different things. Like, I always have this conversation around nutrition, right? And like we have herd animals, we're feeding herds, and people sometimes, like outside of the bacteria conversation, they're like, well, why does this animal have diarrhea or loose stool consistently? And for the most part, there's something in that feed that just is jacking up their systems. They can't process either the fat or the fiber or the protein, right? And you'd look at like you and I, and like you may operate way, way, way better on salmon, and I may operate way, way, way better on beef, right? And you're like, well, I like beef too, and I want to have beef. That's okay, right? But like the same thing is true for drugs, right? And so when you're looking at these, I think this is a really good takeaway for folks that are listening. Keeping detailed records on individual animals makes you a better producer, caretaker, animal husbandry person in the long run, because those records of how these animals, like there are certain animals like whitetails, I've watched them walk through stuff that like other animals absolutely do not. And like you could have animals that are like allergic to something, and they have a bad reaction, whatever that is. Generally speaking, 999 out of 1,000, it's fine, right? But you get to learn all these things, and like it's super cool that that you guys have started integrating these different planes of anesthesia or capabilities of anesthesia into your work. You touched on research a little bit, so I'd like to segue into that. When you first started to develop the cap kits, obviously you had some concentrations and you did some field work, is my understanding. Tell us a little bit about some of those experiences that you had working with folks out in the field.
Yeah. So initially, again, you can dream up ideas in the lab, but until it gets boots on the ground, you never really know how things are going to work. And initially, we tried to manipulate some of those concentrations and see if we could. So one of the big downsides to metatomidine, which is your big heavy hitter for the immobilization side of things, is that it can cause respiratory depression. Right, you get slow breathing, and that's its downside. So we wanted to try to see if we could offset that by manipulating the concentrations of things, still get good immobilization, but less of that respiratory effect. And when we first set out to do it, well, we went a little too far. We dropped the metatomidine a little too much, had those ratios off. We were still getting great immobilizations. It's just we're having to use higher doses than what we wanted, right? So we kind of went back to the drawing board, came up with some different concentrations, and found kind of through initial research that, yeah, this seems to be it, right? And we have teamed up with a whole variety of ranchers, researchers. There's a PhD that we work with that's a big part of what he did was study chemical immobilization drugs at Texas A&M. So we have spent some time with Texas A&M and some vet students doing research. In fact, we're finally starting to compile some of that data for axis deer, Arabian oryx, a whole variety of different species. So that will be published soon, hopefully. The idea is in a perfect world, we would have a published study for about every species we could just on the immobilization side of things, right? And then fast forward, we're here at NADIFA, right? And Dan and I are excited about that because we were always the nerds behind the pharmacists. And, you talk to people every day, but you never get to see them and be around them. And that was a big part of what we were excited about with Capture Lab. So we were excited to go to the NADIFA show, and resounding, one of the things that we got, especially from talking to you and all the other producers, how is this going to work in semen collection? How is this going to work in AI? Well, how does this compare to another product? Well, that sparked another research idea. So we are fired up about looking at semen collection and a variety of different drug combinations, because for every person that would walk up and say, I like a butorphanol, azaparone, metatomidine combo for semen collection, works great for me, that's all I ever use. 10 minutes later, somebody else would come up and say, I'll never use that, and I don't think it works. I'm a MK guy, right? Well, let's answer why the variability there. Why is it working well on some ranches and not others? What are some of the other variations there? What specific component or drug is it? We want to be able to answer those questions. And to be honest with you, if CAP isn't the best drug for semen collection, I want to know that, because I don't care what it is. We'll compound it. Like if we have to make a semen collection specific compound, that is what we will do. And that we will know that those are the 3 or 4 drug combos that consistently work the best for semen collection. Those are the things that we want to know. Unfortunately, it's a seasonal thing to be able to test this. So as you know, we're in the process of trying to get all the pieces to the puzzle together so that this fall we can do a study that's unbiased. We want to involve a research institution to kind of write up the study. Capture Lab itself wants to be distance from it in a sense of no bias because truly, if we determine that MK is the best product for semen collection, we make MK. I have no problem with that. And I will be able to correctly guide our clients in picking the right drug for the right scenario. So that's one thing that we're really excited about as far as the research into things. And then the other thing we found is that research begets more research ideas, right? Every time you start down that rabbit hole, you find, okay, well, we answered this one research question. That's great. But we rose 2 more in the process. So that's the exciting part about being an independently owned pharmacy, somewhat smaller. Our ability to adapt and pivot is super fast, super efficient, and it's a big part of what we're excited about doing here.
I'm going to jump around a little bit. So I want to talk about, and I don't know if I'm using the right terms, but absorption and the importance of deep muscle injections. And I'll tell a little story. So I was using butorphanol, azaparone, metotonine way back when, and at that point I was using 3/4 inch needles and 1 inch needles, depending on size of animal, etc., seasonality, that kind of thing. We're talking whitetails here. And so I was getting, but I was using side port, triport darts. And so I was getting fairly regular resedation. And so if you're not familiar with resedation, basically you dart the animal, you do what you got to do. Let's say you cut some antlers off them, you wake them up, they get up, everything's fine. You walk away just like you normally would. And you come back 20 minutes later and the sucker is flat out snoring away again. And you're like, oh my gosh, the first reaction is, oh my gosh, I killed this animal. Right. And I could not figure out why this kept happening. Right. And so you give them some more. It took a little bit to figure out that you had to give them some more reverser. You give them some more reverser, they wake right up. Everything's fine. What is it? And so I was chatting with a guy that was repping for another company. We were having a steak at Texas Roadhouse or something like that, and we were going through this whole thing. And so he called Dr. Lance, and Dr. Lance is like, again, terminology, lipotrophic. Is that correct? Is that the correct term? Lipotrophic.
In a sense, and I'm glad you asked this question, because this is we deal with this all the time talking to clients. So go ahead and finish. But yeah, you're on the right track. Yep.
Yeah. So basically what was happening is one of the components, I think it was the butorphanol, was latching on to the fat, right? We were getting some sub-Q injection. And we weren't getting all of the medicine down into the muscle for, circulatory nature into the body or whatever. And it was metabolizing much slower. So we're giving a shot. It was reversing the agent in the muscles, the circulatory system. Everything was fine. And then the body started metabolizing whatever latched onto the fat or that sub-Q layer slower later, and they were resedating. Can you fill in the gaps of what I missed from a technical standpoint? Hopefully that queued it up for you. I just remember that. And it was a big problem for a while, and people still have that issue. I really want to touch on the importance of a deep muscle injection when using these compounds.
Yep. So resedation, a lot of people call it renarching. There's a lot of different terms for it. That is a huge problem. And so that's why Dan and I, from a pharmacology perspective, again, we're not veterinarians. So there's the physiology of things. You've already kind of talked about that with Dr. Lance, but from a pharmacology perspective, Dan and I had to really know this flat out, because we have to be able to explain it to end users when they talk about this thing. So in its simplest form, when you talk about any chemical immobilization drug, you have two barriers for it working, right? It's got to get into the blood, which then takes it into the brain, right? So you've got that IM injection getting into the circulatory system, and then it has to cross what's called the blood-brain barrier, which is kind of a protection aspect of our whole system to keep not just any old thing going into our brain, right? So if we can get it to go into the blood quickly, into the circulatory system, it makes it into our brain, it passes the blood-brain barrier and gets into our central nervous system. That's when the drug actually, causes the immobilization, okay? Those drugs can act peripherally, right? So metatonin is the prime example. There are receptors that it acts on that are centrally in the central nervous system. And then other places throughout the body, we call that peripherally. They do completely different things, right? So we want it in the central nervous system. Well, when we talk about that very first barrier, getting it into the blood, right? The subcutaneous space or the fat has a completely different blood supply and absorption rate than that of deep muscular injection. So in an ideal world, we'd be able to walk up and give it IV, because IV, it's 100% bioavailable, meaning it goes right into the system. There's no, it's not metabolized before it reaches its receptors. It just goes right into the system. Well, We can't always do that. The next best thing is an IM injection because the blood supply is super well in those areas. And there's, as you probably know as well, there's certain muscle groups that have less blood supply than others. There's certain, like a nice deep muscle has a lot of blood supply. You're not going to risk getting it into that subcutaneous space or fat layer. We do see absorption rates differ from a hind quarter shot versus a front quarter shot or a neck shot. And again, now we're starting to get into the realm of veterinary advice, right? Mm-hmm. But if you get any portion of that drug into the subcutaneous space, that absorption profile, if you looked at it graphically, is completely different. And so the hard part is you don't always know. So there's a built into a product like CAP, you can get immobilization from 3/4 of a mil. You can get immobilization from 1 mil, and you're not going to really see any much difference. It's a nice buffer zone, let's call it that, right? Well, if you drop 1 mil, and 1 mil will knock them down, so will 3/4 of a mil, but you like to use 1 mil. Well, what if 20% of that drug goes into the subcutaneous space? Well, now you've basically effectively given 0.8 mils into the muscle and 0.2 mils into that subcutaneous space. Well, that 0.8 mils knocks the animal down. You have the immobilization process. You do your procedure. You reverse them. What you're reversing are the drugs that are currently bound to the receptors, right? So that's what the adipamazole is working on, the metatomidine that's bound to those receptors. Well, an hour later, that metatomidine is already starting to be metabolized, and the metatomidine that's in the blood in the circulatory system is being metabolized and removed from the system. 1 hour later, here comes this metatomidine the CAP from the subcutaneous space. And it's not that it's now being metabolized, it's that it's just now entering the circulatory system because that absorption rate is so much slower. Well, now you've got this 20% hit now of, it'd be like walking up and giving them another 0.2 mils injection. Oftentimes that is enough to resedate the animal. And so what you talked about as far as a deep intramuscular injection is absolutely key to making any immobilization drug work as it's intended. Now, you can get a little sub-Q here and there, and you may not even know it, right? But depending on how much you get, that really can add a substantial variable to the efficacy and the effectiveness of any immobilization product.
Yeah. Is there, I don't want to sway too far into the veterinarian space. Is there have you seen folks out in the field that maybe you've worked with that will give, we'll call it a buffer shot. So if the it's a 2-to-1 reverser, they're doing their knockdown with a 1 mil dose, and they're giving their 2 cc's a reverser. If they're taking, the 2 cc recommended amount, giving that IM, and then, maybe do another half cc sub-Q or something along those lines. Especially on, in your free range settings where you kind of lose control, if you will, afterwards. Do you find some practitioners that are kind of working in those spaces like that?
Yeah, so we have had a lot of people discuss the idea of it and discuss the theory of it. I have yet to see any research done on it or anything substantial discussed about that process.
Right.
But what you've just described, I mean, in theory, is a perfect opportunity for another research project, because in all reality, we talk about the buffer zone and CAP. Well, adipamazole also has a buffer zone, right? So you have some leeway to give a little extra dosing than what, as far as if you needed to give a little extra portion of that reversal. In theory, if you were worried about sub-Q injection, the absorption rate from sub-Q space, from a pharmacology perspective, whether you're talking CAP rate, adipamazole, is likely not going to be drastically different. So if you did get a little bit of sub-Q of the CAP and you purposely give a sub-Q injection of adipamazole, the theory would be, you are correct, those absorption rates would kind of counteract one another, right? I feel like that is a kind of an answer to it, but maybe more of a band-aid than anything.
Sure.
The true answer, the true solving problem, is to make sure that you're using the appropriate length needle that is got the gel collar, so you're avoiding bounce back, those types of things, to avoid that altogether. Yeah. But I have heard people talk about looking at suppositories, looking at sustained release injections, all kinds of things with atipamezole to try to avoid exactly what you said with the resedation.
Yeah,
because it is a problem.
Yeah. Oh, I lost my train of thought. I had a good one queued up. It was just I'm running through like some of my experiences that I've kind of seen out in the field, and I know if I'm seeing them, others are as well, relating to these different types of products. You mentioned the semen collections, kind of in that research space. I'd like to. You shared with me a mule deer project that you worked on that I thought was pretty cool, which I think was one of the first times that you'd put cap to test out in the real world. Could you share that story with us?
Yeah. So, kind of to start from the very beginning, along the lines of Dan and I being able to participate in the NADIFA conference and being out with our community, we feel like the better we can relate to the end users of the product, the better we can do our job here in the pharmacy, the better level of customer service we can provide. And I can know a lot of things in theory, right? But without putting boots on the ground and actually being involved in it, it's not the same. So Dan and I, when we decided we were doing this, we took a chemical immobilization course from a guy that's been teaching them for 30 years. In fact, a pharmacy inspector commented just the other day, they're like, well, that's a unique certification to have. We have a board that all of our certifications are on and all of our licensures, so they review that. So anyway, we did that. I've spent some time with Wyoming Game and Fish taking their version of the same course. And so to put boots on the ground and get involved with actually using our drug was kind of this culmination of all this hard work, right? We've done so much in the lab. We've done so much to build this pharmacy, which is an astronomical task. And now we get to go out in the field and I get to see this vial that's got basically our initials written all over it. We compounded it, we labeled it, we did everything. And this biologist is going to take it out there. And I'm going to sit right next to him while he immobilizes this mule deer. And so it's a pretty unique research project where these animals are wild animals, right? But they're on this facility and they really shouldn't be, so they have to be immobilized and removed. And so he set up a ground blind, and it honestly just like hunting from a ground blind. He set up ground blind. Now he gets to put out feed, right? And we are in there, and it had to have been the coldest day in January Wyoming had seen in a while, and I am freezing. And I ice fish and do all that. I can handle the cold. I was freezing, and he's like, well, I guess we're putting your drug to the test to see if it can withstand frozen temperatures. And sure enough, the mule deer herd comes in. He picks out the animal that he wants to immobilize. And I think we were at 15 yards. He darts the mule deer in the hind quarter. And then this was the cool part. You know, we're in the wild, but it's on right at the base of a hillside that's empty. So we got to watch the entire immobilization process take place, how the herd interacted with that mule deer buck, how the other bucks interacted with it. And in all honesty, that buck was ready to lay down after about 3 minutes. And the bigger buck kept pushing him from behind and encouraging him to keep going. And he ended up making it another 100 yards up the hill, finally laid down. And when we climbed up there and I got to, help track respiratory rates, take temperatures, do all of those things, again, it was a humbling experience to kind of have all of that hard work come full circle. And then again, being able to look at dart wounds and those types of things, that's another part of this project that we're working on. And so, yeah, it was quite an experience to do that. And it's still an ongoing project today.
That's awesome. It's probably a good feeling, right? Because like you said, it's kind of this sort of intangible aspect of your job, right? You're like, I make these drugs and, I put my life into this thing and I never get to see them work. I think they work. Right. People tell me they work. And then, you get to see that firsthand. And like you said, your initials are on the bottle and super cool.
Talk about it. Yeah. Talk about accountability. Like I'm literally sitting next to the biologist, and if it doesn't work, he doesn't have to deal with it. And then an hour later call me and go, hey, this product didn't really work. He's literally just turning to his right and going, what happened? What'd you do? So yeah, there was a lot on the line for that one for sure.
I remember my thought again. We're jumping around, folks. I'm popping things into my mind. You had mentioned metatomidine and respiratory rates, and so I think for almost everybody, maybe not everybody, but the vast majority of the deer farming industry, at least for the past, call it 10 solid years, metatomidine has been a core component of our arsenal, if you will. Prior to that, it was xylazine, and so like you had mentioned respiratory rates and metatomidine, and I chuckled internally because like xylazine is just like way worse, and I know there's folks that are still using xylazine, and there's nothing wrong with that, but can you talk about some of the differences between those two drugs, and at least in my eyes, the importance of using metatomidine over xylazine?
Yep. So when we look at metatomidine and xylazine, they're in a drug class called alpha 2 agonists, right? So what that means is we have these receptors in our body, and they are classified, and they're called alpha 2 receptors. So these drugs bind to those alpha 2 receptors, and they activate a downstream effect from binding to those receptors. Well, we don't just have alpha 2 receptors. Think of a receptor kind of like a lock and a key, right? The receptor is the lock, the drug is the key. Well, in this instance, metatomidine and xylazine, there's several receptors that key will go into and work on. Alpha 1 is an example. There are alpha 2 receptors centrally. Remember, we talked about that central nervous system, and then there's alpha 2 receptors that are peripherally. So in an ideal world, we would have a drug that only acts on alpha 2 receptors and only acts on those receptors within the central nervous system, if our goal is immobilization. Okay. When we look at one of the biggest differences between, and there's a lot of differences, but from kind of a simplistic form, if you look at xylazine and you compare it to metatomidine is much more selective for the receptors that we want it to bind to. Xylazine has a lot of negative side effects and things that we don't want, that we don't need, and it's because of that additional receptor activity that it has that metatomidine doesn't. So metatomidine is more selective. And we see that when a lot of drugs in a drug class, kind of each generation, they refine the drug more to make it more selective for the appropriate receptor to elicit the appropriate response. And that's really what you're seeing between a xylazine and a metatomidine, is it's more selective for what we want. And that's probably the biggest take home for users.
Gotcha. And so I'm leaping a little bit, but like when I look at it, I think it's safer. It appears safer to me in the field, right? Because like I've watched how animals react. I call these obviously non-technical terms, but like I call xylazine like a dirty drug, right? And because of how it acts in these animals. And metatomidine is a lot cleaner. That's how I look at it, and that's just based on the symptoms that I'm seeing, right? So like, heart rate is not generally increased when I'm in comparison between metatomidine and xylazine. Body temperature stays a little bit lower. Respiratory rates are much more stable, and so like these are all things for me when I look at animal health that provide me with a sense of confidence that the animal's safe, right? And so I know like a lot of folks that are working out in the field, like, you know, they don't have O2 meters. Like they're they're not gassing these animals when they get them there and putting them on oxygen or anything. Like it's in field work, right? And so, the better and more targeted that these drug combinations can be, the easier and safer it is for all that are involved. Are you, as you continue to test and compound and use different combinations, are you finding more and more things? And maybe those are things for the whiteboard, but like, are you seeing some of that? Are you picking up on these things? What does that
Yep,
look like?
100%. So two of the top things on the whiteboard target safety or efficacy, right? So how the effectiveness, the strength of the immobilization, and then the safety of the immobilization. How can we hone that from a pure pharmaceutical standpoint? And there's other things. So like, there's nothing wrong with. We would love if end users could buy a little small oxygen tank. You buy the little nose cannulas. It's super simple. It's not expensive. And having supplemental oxygen in the field is easy to do, especially if you have a buggy or something that you're, side by side that you're out there with. Oxygen is an easy additive to your immobilization process that drastically helps animal husbandry, right? But so there's a lot of things outside of the drugs that can be done, but what can we do within the drug to make it safer? And a lot of those we've already touched on a little bit with ratios of things. So ketamine, xylazine is a combination that had been used for years prior to, cap type products. And there, some of the variability that you would see is the ratios that they're using of xylazine to ketamine. How heavy are you relying on the xylazine for the immobilization versus the ketamine for immobilization? And then what do you see side effect profile wise there? If you're too heavy on the ketamine side, you're going to see really slow reversals. They're going to everything's just super slow and lethargic. But you won't see a lot of those respiratory side effects because ketamine doesn't really impact respiratory rate the same that xylazine does. So you'll get really good breathing. But the recovery is going to be super rough, right? You can even have seizure activities because that's associated with ketamine. If you rely too heavy on the xylazine side of things, well, now you start getting into the inconsistencies and the repeatability isn't as good because of all the variability in receptor activity. But you have reversibility, right? So again, finding that balance is just one simple way, but we're going deeper and we have some research ideas, and so I wish I could share them on here, but it's just too much in the infancy side of things to do that. But yes, we have goals to make the drug itself safer and more effective.
Yeah, I love that. You guys make my life so much easier out in the field, and I appreciate that. I know my veterinarian does as well. It's like an animal first kind of core goal, right? And we have the privilege to be able to work with these animals, whatever the animals are. And so when we have technology, I figure, these compounds are technology. When we have these technologies that make everything better, it's better for all, right? So I appreciate what you guys do. What did we miss? We jumped all over the place and we covered a whole bunch of stuff. What did we miss before we wrap up?
And to be honest with you, we did cover a lot of things. For me, a lot of it, and it's the same way for Dan. You touched on it in your last little bit here. The idea is, I call it an interdisciplinary approach to animal care, right? So we want, as pharmacists, to be as much integrated with the veterinarians that are prescribing the drugs and the end users that are using the drugs. Because the better we can develop that relationship, that's how we drive the industry forward, at least from our perspective, right? Because the more I know about the challenges you face as an end user, the better I can help out with that. The more you understand, and you don't have to be an expert on this, but the more you understand about some of the challenges of a pharmacy and how do we bring a product to completion? Why are the beyond use dates why they are? Like all of those little regulatory nuances, you can have an appreciation to know that the pharmacy really is doing everything they can to take care of you. We just sometimes have our hands tied from a regulatory stance. And in all reality, we said this earlier in the podcast, this pharmacy lives and breathes by the end users and the veterinarians in this industry. And we want to just build upon that and build upon those relationships. We 1000% mean it, that if you have questions and you don't even buy products from us yet, right, give us a call. We're happy to visit with you and develop these relationships because that is really going to be the key to our success. Our relationships like you and I are building now, I hope that we continue to build with other people within this industry and just continue to expand on it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'll make sure that I link up the Capture Labs RX website down in the show notes there if you want to get a hold of Cullen or Dan over there. Cullen, he's serious. He wants you to call him. So give him a call. He wants to chat with you if you have questions about these things. I really appreciate you coming on today. Hopefully here in the near future, we'll yank one of those items off the whiteboard and have a conversation about them, because you're tickling my fancy in my brain about what kind of cool stuff you have going on. So,
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming on today. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh. We appreciate it. Humbling experience. Appreciate it all.
You bet. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for another episode of the Deer Wizard podcast.